Okay. Propositions are to sentences what concepts were to words. So, if you remember, I distinguished between concepts and words. I said, here is a list of things that is true about propositions that you might want to write down. I will go over them. So just as concepts were not the same as words, but we have to use words to convey concepts because we're not telepathic, the same is true of propositions. Propositions are not the same as sentences, but the only way to get propositions across is to use sentences. Sentences are our human way of transmitting propositions, just as words are our way of transmitting concepts. So we saw with words and concepts that you can have many different words that share the same concept, like dog and chien. And when that happens, we say that they mean the same thing. So we sort of defined meaning when it came to words as expressing the same concept. Well, when it comes to sentences, we're going to talk about propositions. So for example, we would say that two sentences mean the same if and only if they both express the same propositions. Now, actually, I put that propositions in possibly plural because, as we'll see later, sentences can express more than one proposition. But actually, that's like words and concepts. A single word can express several concepts, as we saw with the word light. One word, it can have many different concepts associated with it. Or pen. That's an example where the different concepts, they have nothing in common. There's nothing in common between a writing implement and an animal enclosure. Okay, so propositions are not the same as sentences, but propositions are expressed by sentences. Think of the proposition of a sentence as capturing the meaning of the sentence. And what that means is it sort of conveys the information involved. So, let me put it this way. Here's an example of two sentences, so pause in your writing down and listen to my words of wisdom. Two different sentences can express a single proposition, as it says here. Just as dog and chien are two different words that can express the same concept, two different sentences can express the same proposition. I'll give you a simple example. Obviously, you could give an example from different languages. You could say, the dog is blue. I don't know why you would say that, but you'd say that because I know the French for that. Le chien est bleu. Those are two different sentences, but they mean the same. They express the same proposition. Now, you can also do that with two different word sentences in English. So, for example, I could say, I hit the ball, or I could say the ball was hit by me. We say in logic that they mean the same because they express the same proposition. What does that mean? It means they convey the same information. They say the same thing. What is the thing that they say? The proposition. So the proposition is sort of a description of a state of affairs. So the way to tell whether or not, we will look at some examples where it looks like they're pretty close. The way to test whether or not two different sentences are actually expressing the same, exactly the same proposition, is to do with what is called truth conditions. I'll explain that in a second. But the most, if you had to write down one thing and remember it forever, if you had to write it down in blood or carve it on the back of your hand, as, what's that evil teacher in Harry Potter?
Umbridge.
There you go, Umbridge. If you had to carve one statement on the back of your hand about propositions, it would be this: that propositions have truth value. What that means is they are either true or false. All propositions are either true or false. That doesn't mean that we know the truth value of all propositions. you can have a true proposition where we may never know its truth value. So, for example, somewhere in the universe there is an alien that looks like a purple octopus. That is a proposition. It is either true or false. The fact that we don't know its truth value doesn't stop it having one. So don't confuse truth value with us knowing the truth value. Something can be true or false without knowing it. Okay? Okay, so propositions have truth value. They are either true or false, even if we don't know which one they are. Now, what this means is that not every sentence, in fact, expresses a proposition. Because there are some sentences that do not say something that is either true or false. All sentences say something. Well, that's not quite true. Here's a minor tangent. There is a difference between the rules of grammar and the rules of meaning. A sentence can be perfectly grammatical, but meaningless. The rules of grammar are things like, you must have a subject and you must have a predicate and things like that. You can have all those things, but it could still be gibberish. Like a favorite example of an teacher of mine was, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Okay, that sentence makes no sense whatsoever. That doesn't express any proposition because none of the bits work together. If it's colorless, it can't be green, and ideas can't be either colorless or green, and they don't sleep, and you can't sleep furiously anyway. But grammatically, that's got all the right words. It's got nouns and verbs in the right places. So meaning is slightly different from grammar. There's a difference between what is sometimes called syntax, which is grammatical, and what we call semantics, which has to do with meaning. And we're looking at semantics right now. Okay, but there are perfectly grammatical and even meaningful sentences that don't express propositions because they haven't got a truth value. What kind of sentences, can you think of certain kinds of sentences that are neither true nor false? Actually, I just gave you an example. A question. That's right. Sentences, not just sentences, that's just the genus. I need to differentiate. Sentences that do not express propositions. And questions would be an example of a whole class of sentences that don't do this. What time is it? True or false? That doesn't make sense, right? Because questions don't have truth value. Why not? Well, because, as philosophers in the 20th century pointed out, it was pretty obvious, but they pointed it out anyway, different parts of language are for different things. A huge chunk of language, and it's the chunk that logic is concerned with, is to do with conveying information. That's the part that logic cares about. Logic is an attempt to systematize that part of language, and as we will see later on in the class, symbolize it in a way that is clear and non-ambiguous. But some parts of language are not for conveying information. And questions, the role of questions is something different. It's not meant to convey information, it's meant to help you acquire information. What other kinds of sentences are not true or false? Do not express propositions. Yes?
Like an answer to a question.
Well, no, that does. So if I said, what time is it? And you said, it's 11:26, you would be saying something true.
What if you didn't say it's before, just like 11:26?
Well, then it would be a fragment sentence, but what you actually meant was it's, right? We get away with a lot of fragments in everyday life where, like, what's the weather tonight? What's the weather today? Rain. is that normally we would say that's true or false. If it's sunny, you actually said something false, but that's only because we sort of fill in the blanks. We mean to say that it's raining. We don't, you're not just saying a noun. Any other types of sentences?
Command.
A command, that's right. So think harder, I might say. A command is an example of something that is neither true or false. Do your homework. True or false? Well, we'll see, won't we? Now, command means that the function of that particular part of the language is to get people to do stuff. Any more?
Interjections.
Interjections.
Like, bash my knee against something. And
Yeah, I'm going to call that exclamations.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, suppose I look out of the window and I see a flying saucer, a Vogon, part of the Vogon fleet that I was talking about last time. I might say, knowing me, holy shit. But that doesn't mean, that doesn't express anything true or false. It is just an exclamation. I could say something in those circumstances that did express a proposition, like, I am amazed to see that flying saucer there. Right? That would be true, because I would be amazed. But just an exclamation doesn't have truth there. Probably because in most cases they're fragment sentences. There's one other kind of thing that I'm going to include that's quite rare and a little unusual. I'm going to call them speech acts. That term is used a little bit more broadly in philosophy, but it conveys what I want to convey. A speech act, seeing as we're talking about Harry Potter, a spell would be an example of a speech act, a fictional kind of speech act, because in saying saying the words, if there were such things as spells, the point of saying the words is not to convey information, it's to achieve something by the mere act of saying the words. Now, there aren't really spells, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, but there are occasions where we say things because the saying of them does something. Like, I promise to pay, or if you say, I promise. In saying that, you are creating some kind of a verbal contract. So saying the words, you're not trying to convey information, you're not trying to say something true or false, you're just trying to establish a contract. Other examples would be, I arrest you in the name of the law. By saying those words, you are trying to arrest someone. Now, of course, you can fail to perform the act. If I'm not a police officer, I can say I arrest you in the name of the law and it does nothing. I'm just insane. So you can fail or succeed in a speech act, but they are not things that are either true or false. You know, I pronounce, with this ring I thee wed, you know, and there's nobody there. What a tragedy. That would be an example of you're trying to achieve a marriage, but in the wrong circumstances. So, those are examples of parts of language where you might fail to express propositions.
Would rhetorical statements fall under speech acts?
Rhetorical statements are, well, rhetorical, normally what we say is rhetorical questions. And rhetorical questions are not questions. Rhetorical questions are a kind of question that is not actually a question. It is a disguised way of expressing a proposition. So, you know, imagine you smash, you get your parents buy your car, like you, and you smash it on the first time out. You come in and say, I smashed the car, and your mom says, could you be any stupider, right? She's not actually asking for information. She's not expecting you to say, well, actually, I could be stupider. Then probably you should shut up at this point. But that's just a disguised way of saying you are very stupid. Rhetorical questions, incidentally, are very bad style. Do not use them. Yeah? The kind of people who use them are politicians, because it's sort of a way of trying to establish a a bogus kind of contact with your audience. So, you know, it's like saying, we're all Americans here, aren't we? It's just don't do it. Don't use rhetorical questions. So, propositions have truth value. Different sentences can express a single proposition, can express the same single proposition, like I hit the ball was hit by me. Now, how do you tell whether or not it's the same proposition? Well, if it has the same truth conditions, it is the same proposition. What do I mean by truth conditions? I mean this. You can imagine a sentence being uttered in various circumstances. Like, for example, today is Wednesday. I could utter that today and it would be true. I could utter it tomorrow and it would be false. Okay, so those are two different truth conditions. There are conditions that affect the truth value of the sentence. Or grass is green could be uttered on this planet and it would be true, and maybe there's a planet with pink grass, and if you uttered grass is green on that planet, it would be false. All right, so different circumstances is simply what truth conditions are. To say that two propositions are the same if they have the same truth conditions means if in any circumstances where one is true, the other is true, and in a circumstance where one is false, the other is false, in other words, they always share the same truth value, then they're the same proposition. The way to tell if you've got two different propositions is if you can come up with a situation where one of them is true and the other one is false. If you can do that, you have two different propositions. So I'm defining meaning as two sentences mean the same if and only if they both express the same proposition. What that means is, the way to tell if two sentences do not mean the same is if you can imagine one of them false at the same time that the other one is true. Okay? Now that's a slightly narrow usage of the word meaning, but it's the one we're going to use in this class. Now, I'm going to distinguish that from connotation, which sometimes is used interchangeably with meaning, but here we're going to say that they're different things. And I'll explain a little bit about that when we've done some examples. But let's see. Okay. Jet, could you read number 1, please?
You have a lovely view from your window.
No, I don't. It's Flint.
You have a beautiful view from your window.
Okay, so we have two different sentences there. Do they express the same proposition? Are they conveying exactly the same information? So again, the way to test is to, can you imagine a case where this would be true and this would be false, or vice versa? Or is any circumstance where this is true going to make this true, and any circumstance that makes this false also makes this false? What do you think?
I would think they'd be the same.
They'd be the same. So anytime it's true to say you have a lovely view from your window, it would also be true to say you have a beautiful view. Yeah? Anyone disagree? Yes?
Just because like a view is lovely, does that mean it has to be beautiful?
Well, can you come up with an example? It's always good to be able to come up with examples. If you can come up with an example where it's true to say that it's lovely, but false to say that it's beautiful, or vice versa. Yes?
Well, you could look at it as lovely being a more personalized, like more perspective-based.
Some people say beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Or yeah, or vice versa. I mean, like what's beautiful to some, but then again, what's lovely to some, I don't know.
Now, it's worth pointing out here that some people are a little, some people might want to say there aren't propositions here because they don't have truth value. Why? Because it's up to, they don't have a determinate truth value. Some people would say it's lovely, some people would say it's beautiful, and you'd have differing truth values. That doesn't matter. We're going to assume that there are objective standards of loveliness and beautiness. Beauty.
I like beautiness.
What's that?
Said I like the beautiness.
The beautiness, yeah, it's a good word. I'm going to argue that there is a slight difference between the two. And here's what I'll say. I think lovely contains kind of warm, fuzzy niceness, right? You think kittens are lovely. You see a bunch of kittens, you say, oh, lovely. Whereas beauty can be kind of stark. So for example, you might say an evil witch is beautiful, but I don't think you'd say she's lovely. Or imagine that you're about to die of dehydration in the middle of the Sahara. You can look around you and say, this is beautiful. You know, the harsh beauty of this desert. But I don't think you say, lovely, you know, at that point. That's what I would suggest. But they're pretty close. Okay, the next one is more clear-cut. Karen.
Stealing is a sin versus stealing is a crime. I would say that they're not the same proposition, because something can be a crime and not a sin.
Can you think of an
Stealing
example?
a crime, not a sin.
Well, even if stealing is both, can you think of an example where it's true to say something is a sin and well, or maybe you can explain the circumstances that make stealing a sin, and if they're different circumstances for making stealing a crime.
Well, it's kind of hard to look at sin objectively, because it kind of depends on your beliefs, right? So
What kind of beliefs?
probably your religious beliefs.
Yes. So in other words, sin is a religious concept.
Mm-hmm.
What about crime?
Legal concept.
A legal concept. So, and laws are obviously different from, the laws of the land are different from the laws, unless you live in a theocracy, which fortunately we don't. You can say, you can imagine an island that has no laws, in which case nothing would be a crime, but you know, maybe there would still be sins. Or you can imagine a very lax religion where nothing was a sin, but you would still have laws of the land. You know, and you can certainly think of things that are, nobody thinks are sinful, like, I don't know, speeding or something, or...
Sin is subjective and crime is...
Ooh, I don't think most religious people would say that sin is subjective. There are rules. If you violate them, you're committing a sin. But yeah.
But not everyone, you know where I go with
Well, obviously somewhere sinful.
that. Spiel.
Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. They don't mean the same. They're conveying different things. They can both be, but notice, they can both in fact be true. Stealing is a sin. Stealing is a crime, where we are. But that doesn't mean that they mean the same. So having the same truth value here and now doesn't mean meaning the same. You have to have the same truth value in all possible circumstances. Okay? So, because obviously, having the same truth value doesn't make you mean the same, because today is Wednesday is true, and this is yellow is true. But today is Wednesday does not mean this is yellow, because both happen to be true in these circumstances. All right. Number 3. Cat.
The elderly person ahead of me was doing 25 miles an hour. The geezer ahead of me was doing about 25 miles an hour.
Okay. Do they mean the same?
Yes.
No.
Did anyone say no?
I said no.
Why not?
A geezer is an old man, an elderly person can be a man or a woman.
Very good. Yes, that is true. Elderly person, so as stated, they are actually different in meaning, because geezer, I think geezer is restricted in meaning to old man, you're right. But suppose this said, the elderly man ahead of me, then would they mean the same?
No, because the connotation is totally different. Like, I mean, if you say a geezer, that's like derogative, but if you say...
But in this class, we're going to distinguish, you are right, but in this class we're going to distinguish between meaning and connotation. So if I ask you, do they mean the same, the connotation doesn't affect that. So what affects whether or not they mean the same? Just this. Do they express the same proposition? If it's true to say that an elderly person ahead of me is doing about 25 miles per hour, is it elderly man, let's say? Is it true to say that the geezer ahead of me? Are they both true in the same circumstances? Yes. So we're going to say they mean the same once we've made the gender-based correction. But This is where I introduced the notion of connotation. And connotation, what did I say? Connotation has to do with the feelings associated with the words you are using, not to do with the proposition you are expressing. And the best way I thought the best way, and then I discovered most people didn't know what a euphemism was, but I'm going to struggle on. Who has heard the word euphemism? Who knows what it means? What does it mean?
I don't know the dictionary definition, but euphemisms are
Yes. Tricky to define.
tricky to define by all means.
Can you give me an example? You probably shouldn't give me an example of what it's a euphemism for.
He broke through the door like a battering ram.
Yeah, that's not really an example. That sounds more like a metaphor. Anyone? Yes.
I can't think of one besides this, but something like spanking the monkey. Or
Oh boy.
Yes, which is it's a humorous euphemism for masturbation. I was just going to go with poop and shit, but there you go. That's because I've had small children. You think you'll never say the word poop until you have little kids. Yes, what is the difference? Poop and shit, they mean the same thing, right? They have the same concept because they're individual words, they're not sentences. They capture the same thing. Anything that you could point to and truly say that is poop, you could point to and truly say that is shit. Now, of course, shit is used more broadly. You can say, life is shit. I suppose you could say life is poop if you were very polite. My life, I'm going to commit suicide because my life is poop. At least you're polite to the end. So what is a euphemism then? If poop is an example of a euphemism, what is it?
Placing like a rude or informal term with something else. It's not taken as rude there.
Yes, it's a word that tries to capture something usually nasty in a nice sounding way. The military are masters of euphemisms, partly because they have to talk about nasty things a lot.
Stealing from the enemy is resource denial.
Resource denial is stealing from the enemy. Oh, I was thinking of collateral damage. What does the phrase collateral damage mean?
Dead civilians.
Dead civilians, that's right. It means we killed a bunch of people who were just doing nothing but living their lives. Oops, war sucks. But if you say collateral damage, that doesn't sound as bad, does it? There was collateral damage when we burned down the village, in that there was an orphanage there. It's a way of saying something bad without it sounding bad. So, a euphemism is a classic example of something. A euphemism and the word it is a euphemism for have the same meaning, but they have different connotations. So connotation is to do with the feelings, right? So geezer and elderly gentleman have the same meaning. They pick out the same things. But one is insulting and the other isn't. Okay? Euphemism, connotation matters an awful lot in politics and advertising, which are essentially the same thing these days. Because they have consultants to do this. Consultants' whole job is to come up with terms for labeling your opponent that make people feel badly when they hear them. And conversely, you want positive sounding labels for yourself. So for example, in the abortion dispute, one side, the side in favor of keeping most abortions legal, refers to themselves as pro-choice. Because who doesn't like choice? Choice is good. This is America. We all want choice. Whereas the other side refer to themselves as pro-life. Because life is good. I like life and choice. Where do I stand? Right? Whereas, of course, they want to reserve a negative term for their opponents. So, for example, pro-choicers refer to their opponents as anti-life. Anti-choicers. Whereas pro-lifers refer to their opponents as godless baby killers. there's, you want to use it, and ideally, actually, you try and infect the neutral term with connotations to your purpose. So, for example, the label liberal in political philosophy is kind of a neutral term. And actually, in political philosophy, it refers to both Republicans and Democrats, because it refers to people who believe that humans have rights, individuals have rights and are essentially equal, which is what it says in the Constitution. The Constitution is liberal in the political sense, but it has come to be used in this country to people on the sort of Democrat side of the aisle, and has come to have negative connotations, which is sort of a victory for consultants on the Republican side. So, connotation is very important, but not in this class. In this class, we're going to ignore connotation. We're going to say that we're just going to focus on the propositions and concepts. We're not going to worry about the feelings associated with them. We're going to be like Spock. We don't care about feelings. Feelings are illogical. So, number 3, we would say that they mean the same because they have the same truth conditions. The only difference between them is one of connotation. Okay?